There's a particular kind of peace that you know well. It isn't something you were taught to seek. It wasn't a habit you developed, it was simply always there. The quiet of an early morning before anyone else is awake. The stillness of a room after everyone has finally left. The strange, almost physical relief of being alone. Not because you don't love people, but because in those moments, you can finally hear yourself again. You might notice that other people don't quite understand this. They look at silence like it's something to be filled, something to escape from. They reach for the television, the phone, the background noise. Anything to keep the quiet at bay. But for you, silence isn't empty. It never was. And tonight, we're going to explore why, not as a personality quirk, not as something to explain or justify to anyone, but through the lens of brain science, because what happens inside an introverted mind when the world goes quiet is genuinely remarkable. Why introverts thrive in silence. For a long time, introversion was misunderstood, even by psychology itself. It was framed as shyness, as social anxiety, as a reluctance to engage, a deficit, a limitation. But that framing was wrong. And the science tells a different story entirely. What we now understand is that introversion isn't about disliking people. It's about how your nervous system processes stimulation, all stimulation, not just social. Noise, light, conversation, sensory input. For an introverted brain, these things register more intensely than they do for extroverted brains. Your nervous system is, in a very real sense, more finely tuned, more sensitive to what's happening around you. This is why a crowded room feels not just uncomfortable, but genuinely draining. Your brain is processing far more information per second than it would in a quiet environment. And this is also why silence doesn't feel like absence to you. It feels like relief. Like room, like space to finally process everything you've been holding. In silence, your brain doesn't go quiet. It actually becomes more active, turning inward, making connections, integrating experiences, and doing the kind of deep cognitive work that requires the world to stop demanding your attention for just a little while. This is what we mean when we say introverts thrive in silence. It isn't retreat, it's restoration. It's where your most essential thinking happens. And the science behind it is worth understanding, because when you understand it, you stop apologizing for needing it. There is a network in your brain that becomes most active when you are not focused on the outside world. Scientists call it the default mode network, and for introverts, it is profoundly important. When the noise stops, when the meetings end, when the social performance is over, when you close the door, this network lights up. It's the part of you that reflects, that imagines, that makes sense of your experiences. It processes emotion. It builds meaning. Many introverts quietly feel that their most important thinking doesn't happen during the day, in the rush of activity. It happens later, in the bath, on a walk alone, in those quiet moments before sleep. That's not coincidence. That's your default mode network finally getting the space it needs. Silence isn't when your brain rests. It's when your brain does its most important work. You might have experienced this, a long day of interactions, even pleasant ones, and by the end of it you feel a kind of heaviness, not sadness, not social anxiety, just a fullness. Like your mind has taken in more than it can hold. This is overstimulation, and for introverted nervous systems, it happens more readily than most people realize. The introverted brain tends to have higher baseline levels of internal arousal. It's already running closer to its optimal stimulation threshold. Which means that external inputs, sounds, conversations, social performance fill that threshold more quickly. This often goes unnoticed by the people around you who simply see someone who seems tired or distant. But from the inside, the experience is very specific. The world starts to feel louder than it actually is. Decisions become harder. Patience wears thin, not from irritability, but from depletion. Silence is the reset. It lowers the arousal level back to something sustainable. It gives your nervous system a chance to recalibrate. It's not indulgence. It is neurological necessity. Introverts tend to feel things deeply, and they tend to process those feelings privately, long after the moment has passed. You might notice that you rarely know exactly how you feel about something in the middle of it. The clarity comes later. This isn't emotional avoidance. It's actually a more thorough form of emotional processing. Where some people talk through their feelings as they experience them, many introverts need solitude to understand what they're feeling at all. The inner world needs quiet to speak clearly. In silence, emotions that were compressed during the busy hours of the day get space to surface and settle. Grief finds its shape. Gratitude becomes something you can actually feel rather than just acknowledge. Confusion slowly becomes understanding. This is why after a difficult conversation, even one that went well, you often need time alone. Not to recover from the person, but to finally hear yourself. There is a quality of thinking that becomes possible in silence that simply isn't available when the world is loud. It's the kind of thinking that follows an idea all the way to its conclusion, that notices connections between things that seem unrelated, that asks the second question and the third and the one after that. Many introverts quietly experience something like frustration when their thinking gets interrupted, not because they're antisocial, but because they were in the middle of something. A train of thought that took real effort to build can disappear in an instant with the wrong kind of noise. Silence creates the conditions for depth, for the kind of slow, patient thinking that produces genuine insight. It's why so many writers, artists, scientists, and philosophers have described solitude not as loneliness but as their most productive state. Your need for quiet isn't about being difficult to reach. It's about reaching somewhere difficult and needing the right conditions to get there. There's a reason that meditation, journaling, long walks, and other solitary practices are so consistently associated with self-knowledge. When you remove the social layer, the performance of being around other people, the adjusting and accommodating and reading of social cues, what remains is a much clearer signal of who you actually are. Introverts tend to spend a lot of time in this space. And one of the gifts of that, though it rarely gets named as such, is a fairly sophisticated sense of self. An awareness of your own values, your reactions, your patterns, your contradictions. Silence is where that self-knowledge accumulates. Each quiet hour is, in a small way, a conversation between you and yourself. And over time, those conversations add up to something meaningful. A person who knows their own mind. This is perhaps the most important distinction, and the one most often misunderstood by people who don't share this temperament. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted aloneness. It is the feeling of disconnection, of not being seen or known. And introverts, like all people, can experience loneliness. This isn't about that. What introverts seek in silence is something different. It is chosen solitude. It is the deliberate, restorative experience of being with oneself and finding that to be enough. More than enough. Genuinely nourishing. Many introverts quietly carry a kind of ambient guilt about this. A worry that wanting to be alone means something is wrong with them, or that they don't love the people in their lives enough. But wanting solitude doesn't diminish connection. For an introvert, it often makes connection possible. The time alone is what fills the well back up, so there is something to offer when you return. When stimulation decreases, perception increases. This is something introverts often experience without having the language for it. In a quiet room, you might notice the texture of light through a window, the particular quality of a late afternoon, the way a thought feels different in the morning than it does at night. Small things, things that get swallowed by the noise of a busy life, become vivid again. This heightened perceptual sensitivity is one of the least discussed aspects of introversion. The introverted nervous system, when it finally has enough room, doesn't just rest, it notices. It takes in the world at a resolution that the noise normally doesn't allow. This is part of why so many introverts are drawn to art, to nature, to music, to experiences that reward close attention. In silence, the world becomes available in a way it simply isn't. When you're surrounded by people and obligation and constant sound, rest is not universal. What restores one person can drain another. For extroverted temperaments, rest often means engagement, socializing, activity, filling the space with energy. For introverted temperaments, rest almost always involves reduction, quiet rooms, fewer inputs, time that belongs entirely to yourself. You might notice that spending a Sunday alone, reading or thinking or simply being quiet, leaves you feeling genuinely replenished in a way that a social weekend rarely does. This isn't antisocial. It isn't a failure of community. It is simply the honest reality of what your nervous system needs in order to function at its best. And this is worth defending gently, consistently, without apology, because the world will frequently ask you to rest in ways that don't actually restore you. And saying no to that and saying yes to what actually works is a quiet act of self-respect. I want to slow down for a moment, because what we've been talking about isn't just neuroscience. It's also the story of a lot of years spent wondering why you were like this. Why the party left you hollow when everyone else seemed energized. Why you needed the weekend to recover from the weekend. Why a quiet Tuesday alone felt more meaningful than a busy Saturday with people you genuinely love. Many introverts quietly carry the weight of having been misread, told they were too sensitive, too serious, too much in their heads. Invited again and again into a version of socializing that left them emptier than before, and then made to feel like something was wrong with them for not enjoying it more. None of that was accurate, and most of it wasn't kind. The truth is that what you were experiencing was neurologically valid. Your need for quiet wasn't a flaw in your character. It was information from your nervous system about what it needed to function. And the fact that you sometimes struggled to honor that need in a world that doesn't always make room for it doesn't mean you were doing anything wrong. It means you were human, navigating a temperament that the culture around you didn't quite know how to hold. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is this: thriving in silence doesn't mean you are broken in noise. It means you know where your roots are. You know where you go to come back to yourself, and that is not a limitation. That is a kind of self-knowledge most people spend a lifetime trying to find. Here is a gentle reframe to carry with you. In a world that equates noise with productivity, and busyness with worth, and social ease with emotional health, choosing silence is a quiet act of resistance. And I don't mean resistance as rebellion, I mean it as clarity. As knowing what is true for you, even when the world is suggesting otherwise. Your silence is not absence, it is presence, directed inward. It is the space where you do the things that matter most to you. Think deeply, feel fully, notice carefully, and return to yourself. You don't need to become louder to become more. You don't need to fill more rooms to take up more space. You are already enough, exactly as you are, a quiet mind doing extraordinary things in the stillness that other people rush past without ever noticing. And the next time someone asks why you need so much time alone, or why you seem so comfortable with silence, you can simply say, "This is where I do my best work," because it's true. And because you no longer need to explain it more than that. If this found you at a quiet moment, I hope it felt like company.